A wastewater rupture along the Potomac River has now escalated into a federal-state political confrontation. President Donald Trump has directed FEMA to coordinate response efforts after raw sewage entered portions of the river system, affecting Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. Democratic leaders, including Maryland Governor Wes Moore, argue state authorities were already managing the situation, and that the White House is injecting politics into a public safety issue. Here's why this matters. Environmental contamination events are typically handled by state agencies and the Environmental Protection Agency. FEMA's involvement signals either a significant coordination effort or a shift in how this administration intends to handle infrastructure failures in high-profile jurisdictions. In the next 60 seconds, I'm going to walk you through what is confirmed, what remains disputed, and the one operational detail most coverage is glossing over that could determine whether this becomes a precedent for future federal intervention. First, the facts. A wastewater pipeline rupture led to untreated sewage entering the Potomac River. Public health advisories were issued after elevated bacteria levels, including E. coli, were detected. The EPA confirmed monitoring activity and coordination with local officials. President Trump publicly stated that the federal government would step in to protect the river, directing FEMA to assist. Those elements are confirmed. What is not yet fully defined is the scope of FEMA's role. Is this logistical coordination, funding authorization, or something broader? Because FEMA does not automatically deploy in every environmental incident. Its involvement typically follows formal requests, emergency declarations, or capacity limitations at the state level. That's where the accountability question begins. Was this a necessary escalation or a political escalation? And more importantly, what does this signal about federal authority and environmental infrastructure failures going forward? If you want disciplined reporting that separates fact from political framing, subscribe now. We follow what can be verified, and we update as the record develops. Next, we lay out the verified timeline. What agencies said, when they said it, and what FEMA is actually authorized to do in a situation like this. Let's walk through the verified record. No commentary, no assumptions, just what has been publicly confirmed by multiple outlets and official statements. According to reporting from Reuters, NBC News, Politico, The Washington Post, and regional outlets, a rupture occurred in a wastewater interceptor pipeline serving the Washington metropolitan area. That rupture resulted in untreated sewage entering portions of the Potomac River system. Local authorities issued health advisories after testing showed elevated bacteria levels, including E. coli. Residents were warned to avoid contact with affected water areas while monitoring continued. The Environmental Protection Agency confirmed it is conducting water quality oversight and coordinating with regional environmental agencies. The EPA has not declared a federal environmental emergency at this stage, but has acknowledged active monitoring. President Donald Trump addressed the situation publicly. In statements posted online and reported by multiple outlets, he said the federal government would step in to ensure the river was protected and directed FEMA to coordinate response efforts. FEMA's involvement, as described in reporting, centers on coordination, not unilateral takeover. According to NBC News and Politico, FEMA is working alongside the EPA and state authorities rather than replacing them. Maryland Governor Wes Moore responded publicly, stating that state and local agencies were already actively managing the incident. His office emphasized that Maryland environmental authorities were engaged prior to federal involvement. There has been no formal disaster declaration announced specific to this incident as of the latest reporting. That point is important. Under standard federal procedure, FEMA typically engages in disaster response following either a gubernatorial request or a presidential disaster declaration under the Stafford Act. In this case, reporting indicates coordination activity, but not a declared major disaster. Additionally, there is no confirmed evidence at this stage that drinking water systems for the broader metropolitan area have been compromised. Advisories have focused on river contact and environmental exposure. So to summarize the verified facts, a wastewater rupture occurred. Raw sewage entered the Potomac River. Health advisories were issued. The EPA confirmed monitoring. President Trump directed FEMA to coordinate. Governor Moore stated state authorities were already engaged. No federal disaster declaration has been reported. Those are the confirmed elements. Next, we separate political framing from operational reality. because both sides are now making broader claims about responsibility and authority. Now we move into the part of the story where politics enters the frame, and where it's critical to separate public positioning from operational fact. President Trump has publicly criticized Democratic leadership in Maryland, suggesting infrastructure mismanagement contributed to the severity of the sewage spill. In statements reported by Reuters, Forbes, and The Washington Post, he framed the incident as evidence of broader failures in governance. That is his claim. Governor Wes Moore and state officials have countered that characterization. Moore's office has stated that environmental agencies were already responding, and that coordination with federal partners is standard practice in events involving interstate waterways. That is their position. So what is the reality? Infrastructure failures involving aging wastewater systems are not uncommon in major metropolitan regions. According to reporting, the rupture occurred within a pipeline network that serves multiple jurisdictions across D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. Responsibility for maintenance and oversight often involves a combination of regional water authorities and local governments. There is no confirmed evidence, as of the latest reporting, that a specific act of negligence by state leadership caused the rupture. There is also no official report assigning fault at this stage. At the same time, it is accurate that infrastructure oversight falls within state and local jurisdiction, unless federal funding or interstate regulatory authority is involved. This is where the narrative tension emerges. The White House framing emphasizes federal intervention as protective action. Maryland's framing emphasizes local capacity and ongoing management. Both can be technically true. What complicates matters further is FEMA's role. FEMA coordination does not automatically imply state failure. It can indicate logistical support, interagency communication, or preparedness posture. However, politically, FEMA's involvement signals federal oversight, and that changes public perception. There is another layer worth noting. Recent reporting from housing and disaster policy observers has documented staffing reductions and restructuring within FEMA over the past year. While not directly tied to this specific incident, it raises questions about capacity and prioritization within the agency. But again, that is contextual, not evidence of operational breakdown in this case. The central unresolved question remains: was FEMA's involvement necessary because state capacity was insufficient, or was it initiated as a precautionary coordination move with political implications layered on top? As of now, no formal investigative finding answers that question. Next, we examine who holds decision-making authority in moments like this, and how federal power intersects with state governance. When environmental infrastructure fails, accountability does not exist in a vacuum. It moves through layers of authority: local, state, regional, and federal. So who actually holds decision-making power in a case like this? The wastewater interceptor that ruptured is part of a regional system serving the greater Washington metropolitan area. Maintenance responsibility typically falls to regional water authorities operating under state law. Oversight mechanisms include environmental compliance standards enforced by state agencies, with federal regulation layered in through the EPA. That structure matters, because unless a federal environmental statute is violated or a national emergency is declared, the federal government does not automatically assume control. President Trump's directive for FEMA to coordinate response efforts does not, by itself, transfer operational authority away from Maryland or regional agencies. FEMA coordination can include logistical planning, resource staging, interagency communication, or funding consultation. But here's the accountability layer. When a president publicly directs FEMA involvement, it sends a political signal. It signals scrutiny. It signals oversight. And it places state leadership under national spotlight. Governor Wes Moore's response emphasized that Maryland agencies were already addressing the rupture before federal coordination was announced. That framing underscores state capability. Neither side has produced evidence that the other obstructed action. There is no confirmed report of Maryland refusing federal assistance. There is also no confirmed declaration that FEMA was responding to a formal state request. That ambiguity is where power dynamics become visible. Federal authority in environmental incidents typically escalates under three conditions: declared disaster, cross-state environmental threat requiring federal enforcement, or capacity limitations at the state level. As of current reporting, none of those thresholds have been formally declared, which leads to the larger question: is this a demonstration of federal readiness, or a demonstration of federal leverage? Because when infrastructure failure becomes politically framed, the conversation shifts from pipes and water testing to governance and accountability. And in an election cycle environment, those distinctions matter. Next, we examine how this impacts the public directly, beyond the political clash. Strip away the political back and forth, and here's what matters most: public trust, public safety, and infrastructure reliability. Residents across the D.C., Maryland, and Virginia corridor were told to avoid contact with portions of the Potomac River due to elevated bacteria levels. That is not theoretical. That affects boaters, families, small businesses, recreational users, and anyone whose livelihood touches that river system. So while politicians debate authority, the public wants three things. Is the water safe? Who is responsible? Will this happen again? As of the latest confirmed reporting, drinking water systems have not been declared compromised. Advisories have focused on environmental exposure and contact with contaminated river water. The EPA continues monitoring. Cleanup and mitigation efforts are underway. That is the operational reality. But here is the broader consequence. The Potomac River runs through the nation's capital. When raw sewage enters that system, it becomes symbolic. It becomes about infrastructure age, deferred maintenance, funding priorities, oversight gaps. And when FEMA becomes part of the story, it shifts from a local systems failure to a national governance discussion. President Trump's decision to direct FEMA coordination sends a message about federal posture, readiness, intervention, oversight. Governor Moore's response sends a message about state capacity, competence, management, control. Both are defending institutional credibility, and credibility is what's truly at stake, because Americans watching this unfold are not just evaluating water contamination levels. They're evaluating whether infrastructure in major metropolitan areas is stable. They're evaluating whether agencies communicate clearly. They're evaluating whether political leaders escalate appropriately or theatrically. The unresolved question is not simply who stepped in first. It's this: was this event handled proportionally or politically? If FEMA's involvement proves to be routine coordination, the story will cool. If further reporting shows infrastructure oversight failures or capacity limitations, accountability conversations will intensify. What to watch next? Will there be a formal disaster declaration? Will investigative findings assign maintenance fault? Will Congress request oversight hearings? Will federal funding for regional infrastructure become part of the debate? Those developments will determine whether this remains an environmental management story or evolves into a larger federal-state governance precedent. For now, the confirmed facts are straightforward. A pipeline rupture occurred. Raw sewage entered the Potomac River. Health advisories were issued. The EPA is monitoring. President Trump directed FEMA to coordinate. Maryland leadership says it was already managing the situation. Everything beyond that is interpretation. We follow the facts. We separate them from political framing. And we update when verified information changes the record. Subscribe for updates. We follow the facts.